Car ownership can suck for many people due to significant financial burdens, including high upfront costs, insurance, fuel, and maintenance, as well as the financial strain from depreciation. Additional downsides include traffic congestion, environmental pollution, the stress of repairs, and dependence on a system that may not be conducive to alternative transportation like walking or biking. However, the experience is subjective, and for some, the convenience, freedom, and independence a car provides outweigh these drawbacks. In this episode of 9 to 5, we're going to explore the costs of car maintenance, some practical tips to help guide car ownership, and variety of stories, both wins and losses, in our own car maintenance journeys. This is the second episode in a three-part series regarding cars and financial independence. Retire early. I'm Josh, and with me is my co-host Elliot. Hey, Elliot, how's it going?
Pretty good. How about you, Josh?
It's going great, man. I'm looking forward to this next conversation of car maintenance. And I know you have a lot to offer to this conversation as well.
I don't know if that was a subtle joke and jab at me or what, but yeah, no, we'll see. The level of car geek is gonna have a line drawn in the sand for sure.
Well, I say that because in our last episode we learned that a Tesla is the most reliable and the least costly automotive make of car that there is. And since you're an owner, you probably don't have to experience too much maintenance.
That's correct.
So to kick things off, I have a couple of stats and some interesting news. The average yearly cost for car maintenance and routine services typically falls between $600 and $1,800, but can vary significantly based on the vehicle type, age, and driving habits. I think that holds pretty true for me. My truck is like 13 years old and it generally needs some level of repair from time to time. And then, of course, most cars need some type of maintenance. So I'm looking at tires, oil changes, transmission fluid change, and variety of fluid changes occasionally. Those things aren't every year, but if you average it out, I think that's pretty reasonable.
Yeah, those oil changes. I don't know what those things are anymore. Yeah, we did have a change in battery for the van this year, so I would agree. The 600 to 1800 definitely falls within range of what I think most should expect.
Yep. And many experts suggest setting aside around $50 to $100 per month to cover routine maintenance and potential repairs. And I think this is a really good tip. We used to have this strategy where we had a separate savings account that we would put. I don't know if it was quite this high. It might have been around $50 to $100, somewhere in that range, that would come out of every one of my checks. And we just called it car repair and maintenance. And so when something big came about, we drew money from that. Typically, we didn't use it necessarily for regular maintenance items like oil or, the lower end stuff, but it was nice to have. But we simplified our savings accounts a while back so that we only have essentially one larger savings account that we will draw from for emergencies and big expenses. But what are your thoughts on that, Elliot? Do you have any kind of set aside, like sinking fund account for car maintenance and repair?
Yeah, we kind of follow similar to what you would say we have now is we have just kind of one, I would say our high yield savings account is akin to just that general savings that allows us to have um, money set aside for that kind of rainy day, so to speak. But I totally understand the benefit of having that separate account. And so I could see how that would be very valuable to see that really on a balance sheet to say, yeah, hey, we've got $600 set aside purely for car maintenance items as opposed to, any other random expense that comes up that is going to have to impact our balance sheet at the end of the day.
Yep, that's good. Last point here for kind of interesting news. According to Consumer Reports, what is the cheapest auto to maintain over 10 years? And I already spoiled this one in the last episode where I let you know that the Tesla, according to Consumer Reports, is the cheapest car to maintain over a 10-year span. And they estimate that it's going to cost approximately $5,000. And this is for maintenance as well. So things like tires and brakes and things like that. And on the other end of the spectrum, the most expensive auto to maintain over a 10-year period is a Land Rover. And it's probably not too surprising that a lot of the manufacturers that are considered more luxury are going to be more expensive. So at the on that list, right behind Land Rover, which they estimate would cost about $17,450 to maintain over 10 years. Next is a Porsche, which is $16,000. And then the third most expensive to maintain, which I really cringed at whenever I saw this, because my son just bought a pre-owned one just the other day, is Mercedes Benz. And they estimate that it's going to cost $13,100 to maintain and repair a Mercedes over a 10-year period.
Those European cars certainly are not cheap from my own personal experiences. Especially, even like a mechanic. My dad always had kind of foreign cars. And so it was, whether it was German, Swedish, etc., you know, finding even a mechanic that, and we'll talk about this in this episode, you can see that certainly he was of the mindset that he didn't do a lot of the work himself. He took it to a mechanic. It was hard to find mechanics that knew anything about, you know, Sobs, for example, is
Yeah,
that's a niche within a niche, and with that comes, more expensive costs for even basic services, repairs, and things of that nature as well.
it's like kind of a triple whammy. It's hard to find that mechanic. It's going to be more expensive, and then the parts are going to be more expensive. Well, the labor is going to be more expensive, and the parts are going to be more expensive, and in some cases, harder to source.
Yep, 100%.
So before we get into the rest of the conversation, just a brief call to action here. If you enjoy the show, please give us a thumbs up on YouTube or give us a 5-star review on Spotify or your podcast player of choice. Don't forget to share us with your friends, and we'd love to get your feedback, good or bad. Feel free to leave that wherever you're listening or watching, or you can send us an email. Remember what those email addresses are, Elliot?
Yep. It's Elliot at 9to5pod.com and Josh at 9to5pod.com.
Good job. All right, we appreciate it. So let's get into it. I'll start out with my journey with car maintenance. And I've talked about in the past that I'm a bit more DIY, hands on. And I think my car maintenance journey follows the same bell shaped graph that my car finance journey took. In the early days, whenever I was young and starting out as a teenage driver, I did a lot of my own maintenance and repairs myself. And I did it the hard way. My parents did not have a garage. We had a gravel driveway that actually had a slope to it. And I remember changing my oil, brakes, and doing just basic repairs in that driveway. And it was tough. I remember one situation in particular that was very frustrating was I was changing my oil and I forgot to replace the drain plug at the bottom when I put in my fresh oil. So I drained the old oil, put the fresh oil right in on top of it, realized afterwards it had ran straight through. And at the time, I didn't have another vehicle. My parents weren't home for whatever reason. And I lived in a pretty rural area where I couldn't just walk or catch a ride to the nearest auto parts store or wherever to get some fresh oil. So I had to wait for quite some time till a friend was available to come pick me up and then take me to a store to get some fresh oil. So mistakes were made early on.
Lessons were learned, right?
Yeah. And kind of going similar to your story about your dad's Saab, I this is not a luxury car or a European car by any means, but I bought a Honda Prelude. It was my third car, and it proved to be more difficult to work on. So at that time, the guy that I bought it from, he's like, "Hey, I go to this mechanic and he knows all about Hondas and I trust him with my work. I trust him with my cars. He's worked on this car." And it was then that I don't remember what the repair was, but it needed something that I couldn't handle. And I took it to the shop, and of course, it was like sticker shock. It was so expensive, whatever it was, that it kind of started mindset of like cars suck, because they just break and you got to get them fixed and it's expensive. I only bought one new car in my entire life, and then that car ended up being a lemon that I didn't have for very long, and it was a Hyundai Elantra that we bought. My first wife and I, we bought thinking that it was going to be this great car that had an amazing warranty, 100,000 mile warranty back in the day, and we started having problems with it after about a year, and it was something that I couldn't diagnose and fix, and we took it to the dealership thinking, no, this can be covered under warranty, and of course it wasn't. It was something that wasn't covered under 100,000 mile warranty, and they at the shop had a hard time fixing it, and I think we had to take it back and forth a couple times, and ultimately we traded it in on a pre-owned like Ford Focus after that. But again, just kind of solidifying that mindset for me that cars suck.
Yeah. Whenever you get slammed with that first repair bill or just seeing how much, like, even right now, I know that the brakes have to be repaired on one of our vehicles and or replaced on one of our vehicles. It's like, yeah, I know in the back of my head, like, oh yeah, that's gonna suck, whatever the cost of that may be. It always seems like sticker shock every time that you see it whenever you a mechanic for sure, and just be like, I'm gonna spin the wheel and see how terrible is this gonna feel on the other side. So absolutely have that feeling that cars just suck.
I remember you asked me about that, about changing brakes. Is that something that you're willing to tackle on your own, or you feel like that's kind of outside of your comfort zone?
I'm not saying that it's completely outside of my comfort zone. Now, this is on Dawn's car, so I don't know if she'll say that it's in her comfort zone of me doing the brakes on her car. But yeah, I mean, and I'm sure we'll kind of get into this more in this episode, is the types of repairs that I've done on my cars in the past as far as maintenance is concerned. Like I've done like I know how to change a tire, I know how to change the oil in my car, top up fluids, replace wiper blades, but outside of that, like I mean I think maybe the most intense repair per se that I've ever done was replacing like a timing belt. And even that wasn't, I mean, certainly not rocket science.
Was it the timing belt or was it the serpentine belt? Yeah.
Yeah, it was the
Timing
serpentine belt.
belts very much involved.
Yeah, no. See, you get somebody that clearly shows how much they're not a car guy, right? Is I like
Yeah.
driving nice cars, but yes, the maintenance is a whole nother beast. Is yeah, no, it was a serpentine belt. You're correct.
And I think this might be a good place to enter maybe a bit of a disclaimer here that I'm by no means an expert. I may have strong opinions and I don't mean to offend anyone or be critical or judgmental, but I may potentially come across that way.
I give no apologies. I'm offensive, and that's just how I am.
So I had around that time that we had that vehicle that we were struggling with, that was our first new car, we were shopping around for reliable mechanics. And that I feel like that industry has improved somewhat in the last or in recent years, but this was 20 years ago, 25 years ago actually. And I think it was kind of at the height of the struggle to find reliable mechanics. And we were shopping around. I remember in one situation I had a car that it was I can't it was just running very rough, and I took it to the guy that I had been taking it to for a while, and he quoted me some I thought like astronomical price at the time, and I was like I can't afford that. I'm not going to pay that. We took it to another shop and they're like, "Oh yeah, it needs a new this or that, whatever it was." And it was a fraction of what the other guy was quoting. So, I mean, and that is another area that's frustrating for people is, finding a reliable mechanic, feeling like you're not going to get ripped off. And so I think that there is some value, this is where my opinion comes in. There is some value to having some basic knowledge of cars, how they work, what the parts are, and not getting taken advantage of. And of course, mechanics are going to make mistakes too. They're going to misdiagnose something. So there's that aspect of it. But just having some of that common fundamental knowledge, I think, can go a long way. You don't have to be an expert and you don't have to know necessarily how to do the work yourself or what it entails, but just having some fundamental understanding of what could be going wrong so that you don't get taken advantage of is a good first step, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's very interesting, right? Is the concept of getting ripped off is something, I mean, certainly not mutually exclusive to the car maintenance sector, but is the thought, should the consumer have to be somewhat educated to prevent a professional in the industry taking advantage of them versus should there be some sort, you know, whether that's ethical line or whatever, that's just preventing that from occurring. So I mean, I get having the personal responsibility of having basic understanding, but I mean, it's there is a layer of truth in the, I would say, the caricature of a repairman and how they take advantage of people because they know, they feel like they have somebody that's less savvy than they are, and so they can take advantage of them.
Yeah, and we'll tie this back into financial independence as we go along here, but as I continue my journey in that bell-shaped curve era, I had going back to our previous episode, we had one solid, reliable car, Lori and I did in our 30s, and then we had these bad cars that were somewhat unreliable that I was buying cheap, and I was trying to do some of the repairs and maintenance to them on my own. And around that time was when our kids started driving, so we buying more older, somewhat unreliable cars, and I felt like at one point I had a fleet of them. And my mother-in-law back then was I was kind of helping her out as well as she had an older car. So I had like these three or four cars that were always around that I felt like on my Sundays I was always there was a period of time where I was constantly doing some kind of maintenance or repair to a vehicle. And my motto at the time, I was just kind of being grumpy. I was constantly saying cars suck. So a couple of years ago, I did develop more of an interest in cars. So my kids got a little bit older. They've gotten more independent and self-reliant with their cars. And I wouldn't say necessarily that they are all, my youngest is mechanically inclined. The older three, not so much, but they have gotten more independent when it comes to taking their cars somewhere to get them repaired, or, I'll help with the general maintenance. So my cars suck motto kind of lessened a little bit. And then somewhere along the line, I think through just spending time with my youngest son, he introduced me to some mechanics that were on YouTube and telling stories about getting cars up and running that had been sitting for a long time. So I started to get more of a new interest in cars, especially older cars, because older cars tend to be a lot easier to work on than newer cars do. So I started learning more about them and discovered there's a lot of general repairs that people can do on their own that are much more DIY friendly, I feel like, than probably a lot of people will give themselves credit for. And here's maybe the first tip here is following your owner's manual for preventative maintenance is a really good idea. Just question for you, Elliot, is that something that you guys practice with your cars? Do you look at that owner's manual and see what kind of repairs are needed on those general guidelines as far as mileage?
I try and follow that, but I will say that I'm not religious about it like I probably should be. So I mean, I certainly know it's like, okay, there's, and of course it depends on your make and model that they're going to have different maintenance milestones per se, but like that 80,000 mile mark or that 50,000 mile mark that, you know, you have different maintenance activities that you do with those things. But In the past, I have been less good about them than I would say I am now.
Yeah. And that's probably a good place to be. I would say that I'm not as good as I would like to be as well. I told the story in our last episode about my wife's previous car, which was an Outlander, had a CVT, continuous variable transmission, that we didn't change the fluid in and it burned up at 180,000 miles. The rest of the car was totally great, but getting a new transmission was going to be like $8,000 and it wasn't worth it. So I'm trying to be in your to your point a little bit more religious with it, but still not as good as I would like to be. I really do try to keep an eye on the fluids and make sure that I'm getting those changed at their proper intervals, and we'll see how things go. But I think there's a lot of people out there that aren't mechanically, they maybe tell themselves a lie that they are not mechanically inclined. And I don't think you necessarily have to be mechanically inclined to be able to look at your owner's manual and say, okay, these are the things that I need to do. And if I do these things, there's a good chance that I'm going to prevent a bigger problem and avoid a surprise if something were to fail.
Fair that you don't have to be mechanically inclined, obviously, to crack your owner's manual and make sure that you're following a maintenance schedule. Uh, but maybe I'll flip it back to you. Why do you think that more people don't do that?
I will say that it's probably partly because of lack of interest. People are like, kind of to use your words a little bit earlier there, like, I like cars, but I don't like to work on them, or I don't want to necessarily work. Maybe this isn't necessarily what you said, but I think some people will say, I don't really want to worry about it. It's kind of like with personal finances. If you take a little bit of effort will go a long way, and a lot of people just don't really want to think about it. And that's one of the things that I've really tried to encourage my kids to do, is really keep an eye on things, an eye and an ear on things. If you hear something that's doesn't sound right, let's get it checked out. If you see something that doesn't look right, whether it's a light on the dash or maybe it's a spot on the ground or any number of things that don't appear to look right, let's take a look at that and see what's going on. But they have on several occasions ignored those warning signs, and it has led to bigger problems. And I think that there's a lot of people that probably fall into that category where they're not necessarily looking at what the recommendations should be for basic maintenance, and then they're ignoring those warning signs that something is probably going wrong with their vehicle until it's at a point where it's no longer running.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, it's if it ain't broke, don't fix it is the mentality or mantra that a lot of people follow is, hey, if my car's still running, then I'm going to let it keep on running until all of a sudden, yeah, the catastrophic event comes and then, okay, what's it going to cost me to fix this problem, right?
So a little bit of data around this fact here is that according to multiple recent surveys, a significant majority of drivers do not perform enough preventative maintenance on their cars. Upwards of 64% of drivers are currently putting off vehicle maintenance, and this figure is even higher when it comes to specific, less frequent service items. So, kind of bringing this back to a financial independence topic, I believe that what is the saying here, Elliot? You're usually pretty good at these sayings. What is it? An ounce of something is worth a pound of whatever. So an ounce of maintenance is worth probably a pound of avoiding an expensive repair. I
Yeah.
probably butchered that, but
Yeah,
I
no,
think you
I
get
don't
the
know
gist.
the idiom by heart, but I get your intent is, yeah, obviously just a little bit of preventative maintenance goes a long way in preventing that massive failure down the line. Some stats on inadequate car maintenance. So with a 2023 Finance Buzz survey found that 69% of drivers intentionally delay maintenance even when they know that it's due. And a 2021 survey found that over 30% of drivers put off oil changes for more than a month. What are your thoughts on all those?
I'm not surprised. And the oil change one there is one that just kind of hurts because I feel like oil changes is one of the maintenance topics that should be just widely known. Of course, you don't have to worry about that kind of thing with your Tesla, but most people should know that cars need to have their oil changed. Oil breaks down so quickly. There's so many moving parts. I actually looked up a stat that there is approximately 2,000 moving parts in a gas engine, and the oil is what keeps all those things moving fluidly. I actually had someone, a friend of my son's, pulled up one day last week. The car was making all kinds of clanking and cluttering sound, and I was like, "There's something wrong there. That thing sounds like it's about ready to lock up." It just did not sound right. And lo and behold, I heard yesterday that that car is not currently working. So I feel like it was either low or out of oil, and I just that one is really the easiest one that people can, going and getting your oil changed is going to cost a little bit nowadays. It's probably 60 to $70, if not more. Doing it yourself is going to be probably about a third of that, and it's a really easy thing to do. And yeah, I think that's what most people experience, and what I have in the past is that you avoid something, and then it turns into a bigger problem, and then the motto of cars suck just starts to take over.
No balls quickly, right? Yeah, I mean, changes are probably, I mean, it's like the table stakes of just the one of the easiest things that you really can do, right? Is I would say that was one of the pieces of car maintenance that I've almost always done is change my own oil, your own oil filter, things of that nature it's so easy to do. And even from taking it to your local car place like Dobbs or whatever, the fact that like you said, you get it for maybe a third of the cost. It's also a third of the cost. And like I always put like synthetic oil in my car. And so it was not only that it was a third of the cost, it was probably a third of the cost with better components, uh, you know, at the same time. And so it's just something very easy to do. And
Yeah, it's something.
also the time that comes along with waiting for somebody else to do it on your car by the time that you do it yourself, you probably saved yourself time.
Yeah, for sure. I had a little bit of extra information on just an oil change and some of the things that I thought that, like, from a tools perspective, that people could benefit from. So, like a basic mechanic set you can get at Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever, socket wrenches and that kind of thing, is going to run you about $150. And then if you added on a jack and jack stands, things like that, that you can get from Harbor Freight for relatively inexpensive, and then maybe some ramps or something to get your car up off the ground a little bit. And then, of course, gloves and eye protection. If you wanted to do all this stuff yourself, well, you buy it once and you can have a lot of that stuff forever. And then you're going to, like you said, it's going to be like $25 or so to change your own oil versus the 60. Plus, you can have the flexibility of putting in perhaps a higher quality oil. And also the satisfaction that it was done right is something that I've always benefited from, because I've had some experiences where things haven't been done right from a from a dealership or a mechanic, and it's sometimes just the basic maintenance like that that can can be messed up.
Yeah. Unless you forget to put in that drain plug, then you might be out some more.
Yeah, I'm not perfect either, but I at least knew that I didn't fill or I put that drain plug on. I've heard horror stories where people have. My son worked for I won't mention the name of the company, but stuff like that happened where they sent cars down the road that they forgot to fill back up with oil, or that they forgot to put that drain plug back on. And yeah, that's a very costly mistake for a repair shop.
Yeah, no, I was talking to my neighbor just the other day. He used to be a mechanic and he's retired now. And he had his car, uh, his brakes done at his place of employment, and somebody else did it for him. And he went to go drive home, and he was like, "Yeah, man, it's making this terrible noise," and pulled into kind of a gas station that had a repair shop next to it. And sure enough, the screws for the brakes weren't put back in. And so it was like the
Ooh,
brake was just like, you know, plunking every time that
oh my gosh.
it went around. And so, yeah, he said that was the last time he let his car get worked on by somebody else, and even at his own personal shop, stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, I get that we're all human, but at the end of the day, you're gonna who's gonna look out for you better than you, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's a major safety issue there.
Yes.
So maybe just to kind of add, this is from motor.com, some of these statistics. So reasons for neglect. The two most common reasons drivers delay maintenance are cost and being too busy. So many people also lack the knowledge to do their own maintenance, and more than half cannot afford an emergency repair costing over $1,000. So there's kind of 2 points in there maybe we can touch on is the being too busy one there. That one, I mean, for me, this is again my opinion is going to come in is that you got to make time. I mean, this in a lot of situations, your car is it's not necessarily an asset, but it is a tool that is going to get you from point A to point B, like we talked about in the previous episode. And if you take care of it, it'll take care of you. And that's kind of the way I feel about cars is if you ignore it, it's going to let you down. And being too busy isn't a good excuse for ignoring that because it's going to at some point in time it's going to let you know when it needs attention. It's going to let you know the hard way.
Yes, it'll find its way of extracting that time from you one way or another. So
Yeah.
it's much better to do it on your own schedule than it choosing its own schedule.
Yeah. Well said. So and then the other point there with not having the ability to afford an emergency repair that costs over $1,000. And that's certainly unfortunate. And that goes to part of why we're wanting to have these conversations and hopefully help people with their money journeys. And I certainly was in that situation once upon a time where it would have been really hard to come up with $1,000 and probably would have gone on a credit card. And I'm thankful that I'm not in that spot now, but I can certainly empathize with people that are there. And if it's something where your car is still operable and running, and you know that it needs this $1,000 repair, there's a pretty good chance that if you don't figure out a way to get that fixed, that it's going to result in even an even greater cost, and potentially in some cases, it's going to result in the purchase of a different vehicle because you're going to have catastrophic failure and have to get a different car. So don't ignore, I mean, just, I guess to summarize here, don't ignore maintenance when it comes to vehicles. It can cost you a lot of money in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I joke around a lot, but I'm one of those people that when I go to assemble something, I look at the instructions, and I I usually follow those for a reason. And half the time is, coming from an engineering background, is saying, "Hey, there's a reason why somebody detailed things out in a certain way or a certain order or saying a certain thing. It's not to unfairly extract more money from your pocket in the cases of instructions or recommended maintenance and things of that nature. It generally is to extend the life the purchase that you've made. So as counterintuitive as it may be to spend money up front while you're not having any problems, it really is going to save you money over the long run.
Yeah, and I think that with looking at the recommendations, they were set for a reason because it's been studied that these things wear out and they can't necessarily build a higher quality whatever it is that's going to last longer than, I mean, it potentially will last longer than the recommended replacement, but probably on average it's not going to. So in the case of like the engine oil as an example, a lot of times, and it varies depending on the type of oil, but anywhere from 3,000, 5,000, you see some that are higher than that now as far as the recommendation for changing. And if you go well beyond that, I mean, the viscosity of the oil is broken down so much that it is not doing what it's supposed to do to keep those parts moving freely. So another just kind of an example of something that you can easily see that wears out is your tires. And those typical tires, especially if you keep them rotated and inflated properly, are going to last you approximately 50,000 miles, somewhere in that range, give or take. And you're not going to get much more out of tires than that. You're certainly going to start to lose traction, and they can't make tires that are going to last forever. So it's just kind of like an example of one thing on the car. But if you look at it from the perspective of the things that you can't see, just know that there's like that same kind of wear and tear going on inside the car with the brakes and other things as well. So it just goes back to the same point of just following those recommendations can save you a lot of money in the long run.
Absolutely. So we can talk a little bit more about the benefits of preventative maintenance. So, of course, we've got enhanced safety, increased vehicle lifespan, lower long term costs by avoiding those major repairs, improved fuel efficiency, higher resale value. So, by really performing these regular checks, inspections, service, we're catching these minor issues before they become major ones and really ensuring that your vehicle runs reliably and efficiently for years to come. And overall, saving you that much money because you're having to buy that replacement.
Yeah, that's a really good point there. And something that I think we talked briefly about in the previous episode is that I really try to strive to keep my cars at least 10 years and try to get as many miles out of them as I possibly can and avoid the car payments. I know that there's going to be maintenance and repair costs, and AAA reports that maintenance, repairs, and tires cost on average 10 cents per mile. So when you look at 20,000 miles, if you were to drive 20,000 miles in a year, your repairs and maintenance cost is going to be approximately $2,000. I think that's a really good rule of thumb. Thankfully, I don't drive that many miles in a year anymore. It's probably closer to like 10 to 15. But still, there's a cost there with the repairs and maintenance, and I think everybody should be aware of that. I think too about those going back to our previous episode and the expensive trucks and those people that buy those expensive trucks. I don't know if they factor that into the equation. And you may have a lot of those things that are going to be under warranty, but tires aren't, oil changes aren't, and you have these great big vehicles that are going to have tires that are going to cost, gosh, I think some of them cost like $250 per tire,
At least.
and that might be on the low side.
Yeah, no, I mean that's certainly on the low side. I I'll give a personal example. Me and my buddy Rob were actually going out to, I think we were either going to a show or going to a bar, meeting up with some friends, and he drives a big truck that that is long paid off, but regardless, uh, hit a curb, popped a tire, and I know that was multiple hundreds of dollars just for a singular tire. You know, it's just part of doing business. Yeah, I mean the same thing. Like my expensive door lock on my Volkswagen Phaeton. Yeah, you know, certain things just come with higher costs.
As soon as that dollar figure, as soon as I mentioned it, I was like, oh, that's really low. There's probably some of these. some of these big trucks probably $400 or $500 per tire. And yeah, that's just part of owning a vehicle. But again, I it's kind of going into the situation with your eyes wide open and knowing that if we go back to our previous episode, we talked about average new car prices, our monthly cost, and it ranging around $750 a month. Well, on top of that, you have to factor in a couple $1,000s a year in repairs and maintenance. And what does that equal a month? It's a couple $100. And then you have insurance. So the true cost of car ownership for a new car on average is probably still going to be about $1,000 a month.
Yeah, at least
That's a lot.
that's assuming that you're on the low side of that car payment if you have one. And yeah, I mean, it. How many people really just try and say, "Oh, the cost of this car is this car payment times 12. That's how much my car payment is." But yeah, when we talk about that, we talk about gas, we talk about maintenance, we talk about insurance, you talk about, like you said, even just, there's a reason why if you make a trip, for your work in your own personal vehicle that they pay you that federal mileage. There's a reason for that. It's not that they just are feeling generous out of the kindness of their hearts to give you money. Is there is a real cost of that wear and tear on your car.
That reminds me of Your Money or Your Life. And I remember whenever I read that many years ago, and how did they phrase it? It was your life energy, and calculating based on your pay and comparing that to the cost of things that you were spending your money on, how many hours of work did you need to have in order to pay for that thing? And I kind of did that exercise loosely, but around the cost of car ownership. And it was like for every, I don't know, like 8 hour shift that I was at work, I think it was like somewhere between 1 and 2 hours of that shift was went to paying for the transportation that got me there. And that was pretty eye opening at the time that it's just and it probably also fed into my motto, cars suck,
Yeah, yeah,
back then.
exactly. When you're saying that 25% of your working day is just going to transportation costs, it's pretty easy to have that motto, car suck.
So maybe one tip to share that's been helpful for me in ways that we can kind of track our maintenance and record it and kind of get alerts too as to when things are coming up. I use an app. I think there's probably plenty out there, but I use an app called Simply Auto. And every time Lori or I get gas, we record it in the number of miles that our car currently has on them. So it does a really good job of recommending all of your maintenance needs, and then you can customize it based on your manufacturer's recommendations. So I did some time to set that up for our specific vehicles, and then it'll give me a reminder like, hey, your oil change is coming up, or your transmission fluid needs to be changed, or whatever the case might be. And it's all based on me inputting the receipt of the gas fill up and recording the number of miles that we have at the time. So it gives me estimated average miles per gallon, and then it also gives me reminders for maintenance. Do you have anything like that, Elliot? I mean, your Tesla is basically a robot. It tells you what it needs when it needs it.
I was gonna say it tells me what I need when I need it. I mean, it's got all the reports in there saying it's just doing a lot of that on the fly. There's a whole report section that tells me my average miles. It does the what I probably should have gotten versus what I actually got too. So if I'm particularly having a lead foot for that driving session, it can show where, if it was going up very linearly and then all of a sudden it started to trail off because, hey, I I sped up to get around a car or something like that, then I can see how it deviates from what the expectation is. Or maybe I'm drafting but behind that 18 wheeler for 10 miles and I've somehow exceeded its projections.
Nice. Does it have the ability to tell you when like consumables need to be replaced, like tires and brake pads?
I don't know. Which you're showing me for the funny that I am no, not not to my knowledge, but I would have to go
Okay.
look.
Okay. That's
Homework.
fair. And yeah, I mean, I think that again, it just if we tie this back into financial independence and level of frugality, just money savings tips, it's any way that we can kind of hack the car owning experience, whether it be upfront just buying something reliable, but on the back end ensuring that you're maintaining it. Because you can buy a Honda Civic, like my daughter's about ready to turn 300,000 miles in the upcoming months, but if she doesn't keep the oil changed and doesn't do some of those things that I mentioned, just keeping an eye out, keeping an ear out, making sure that things are running properly, and then also making sure that she asks me to take a look at the just fluids and things like that. It's not going to last. It's potentially not even going to see that 300,000 mile mark, which we're excited to see. So on the back end, it's definitely an opportunity to save you a lot of money and avoid high repair costs if you just perform the some general maintenance.
Yes. So I've got my 1% better action item is at least crack the maintenance manual on the Tesla. Like you said, I have 50,000 miles. I certainly haven't hit 50,000 miles on my car yet.
That's
But
fair.
yes, all those things. So Josh, is there anything else that we want to kind of talk about before maybe moving into rapid fire?
Okay.
All right, Josh, I got a good question for you. How much money do you think that you've saved by learning to handle your own maintenance?
And that is such a great question. I don't even know how to go about tracking that, but I have one story that comes to mind in a repair that I made where my water pump went out on my truck. And it was pretty easy to diagnose. I watched a couple of YouTube videos, which is another great tip. You can find a tremendous amount of education and information on YouTube for free. I watched a couple of YouTube videos and said, "Oh, this is a pretty easy repair." I was on the verge of taking it to a shop to get it replaced, and the part was like $60. And I picked that up, and I had to get a little bit of coolant. This was probably a year or so ago, before the radiator issue that I've talked so much about recently. And I was able to get that changed in like an hour. So there's two aspects to look at here. One is the cost savings because I mentioned it to my son, and he said that getting it changed at the shop would have probably cost $400 to $500. And like I said, the part was 60, and I think a jug of antifreeze was 20. So it's pretty significant savings there, which was all labor. But the other part of it is when we think back to that point where the data said that people avoid maintenance because they're too busy. If I would have ignored that, it definitely would have turned into a bigger problem, which would have been my water pump would have went out completely and potentially led to overheating, which could have ruined my engine. And then the other aspect of that is that if I would have taken it to a shop, I would have had to make an appointment. I would have had to take it and drop it off and find a ride back or potentially wait there for hours while they fit me in and fixed it. So there's like a time component to that as well. So long way to answer your question, but I would have definitely estimate that it's been thousands of dollars, if not in the $10,000 to $20,000 range over the course of my life, just by learning how to fix things on my own and have a few basic tools and things like that.
That's pretty astounding when you think about that. Not to mention the uh, essentially the money that you would have spent that instead you potentially were able to save and the earnings that you've made off of that instead. Um, yeah, I mean, it's it, it's just crazy how much like I look at myself, right? And I very openly say that car repairs beyond the ones that I've already mentioned in this episode are not things that generally that I've done myself. But, that I I know that the answer is as simple as going to YouTube, finding the part, and sitting down and having the time to go do it. And everybody has the time. Let's not kid ourselves with the fact that nobody's got the time. I mean, my Netflix history clearly shows I have time. So the I think it's always the hesitancy is more along the lines of do you have the competency to really go do this and feeling comfortable in the uncomfortable of going and doing that. And so just like when we talked about in some of our previous episodes of you doing home repairs or rehabs, things of that nature, is kind of building that muscle through those initial steps of saying, okay, well, where, like, we talked about how I mistakenly said that I replaced a timing belt as opposed to a serpentine belt is like, okay, well, where do we graduate to from, how much harder is changing my brakes from, doing a serpentine belt or changing your oil is like, there's got to be a graduated level. Sure, like I can do these things if I put my mind and time and effort into it, but obviously there's a cost to it in that regard as well.
And that's very fair. I mean, it's not necessarily for everyone, but at the same time, I think that there's a component of it that's a self-fulfilling prophecy where people will say, "Well, I'm not good at it, or I'm not hands-on, I'm not competent." And, I didn't start out being able to change a water pump or being able to change a radiator or whatever it may be. I started out changing my oil and graduated from there. And, if something came up that needed to be replaced, I was in a situation for a long time where it's just I didn't have another choice. I had to do it myself, otherwise it wasn't going to get done. And I think that's served me well and it's been beneficial. But I think a lot of people can do some of this basic stuff on their own. And I think, like I mentioned at the very top of the conversation, that there's a benefit to understanding how your car works and not get ripped off by a mechanic, but there's also a component of doing something and having the pride that you accomplished it on your own and that you are taking care of your car so that it can take care of you.
Well, I've got one more question before we move into rapid fire. So, what's one thing you'd say to someone who's afraid to even pop their hood?
Oh, pop the hood and look at what's going on underneath there. It might be overwhelming and messy and it might be ugly, but you can take a look at it, and a lot of the stuff under there is a lot more simple than I think most people think that it is. It's not as complex as, well, yours might be a little different. A Tesla, there's probably nothing under the hood there, but for a gas engine, there, even though a lot of them have computers and things on newer cars, they all run with the same basic principles. And if you can watch a couple of YouTube videos on how a gas engine operates and the things, you can kind of get a sense of what's going on under the hood, and it becomes a lot less overwhelming.
Well, I lied. I've got one more question that I like and I want to hit you with. So, what's one simple maintenance task a listener could try this week to save money and gain some confidence?
I'd say breaking open that owner's manual and thumbing through it and looking at those recommendations for when certain items should be replaced, and see if those things have been done on your vehicle. And if they haven't, taken a look at what that involves. Maybe it's something that you can do yourself. Maybe it's something that you need to make an appointment for. But if you haven't reached that milestone yet, just start thinking about setting aside some of that money that we talked about earlier for a monthly budget and planning for getting that maintenance item replaced.
I've got one bonus one here is easy enough that I can do it, so you can do it too. So as the weather changes here in St. Louis, I would say tire maintenance. So make sure that your tires are properly inflated. Does make a shocking difference in just the mileage that you can get. So no excuse not to do it.
That's a good tip.
Yeah,
Yeah, that is a good tip, and definitely for safety reasons, it's a good. It's always good to inspect your tires. Just give them a look over and make sure that they're properly inflated and that they have plenty of tread left on them.
absolutely. All right, into the rapid fire. WD 40 or duct tape? How many of these things have you
Duct tape
actually
all the way.
used on your in your car maintenance times?
WD-40 all the time, or some kind of equivalent, because often, I mean, it's handy to have a basic mechanic set, but a lot of times, especially if the vehicle's a little bit older, those nuts and bolts are going to be tougher to loosen. So WD-40 or liquid wrench or some kind of lubricant like that goes a long way. Duct tape, as you know from our previous conversations, I actually patched my radiator temporarily with duct tape and then more permanently, I guess, with some JB Weld, which kind of falls into the same category as both of those other items. How about for you, Elliot?
Yeah, probably WD 40 is. I don't think I've ever used duct tape in any of my car repairs. But WD 40, I certainly have.
I've seen some cars recently that have like bumper, especially in the city of St. Louis, which you probably have seen.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know what it is. I don't want to take any incorrect guesses here, but I've seen a lot of bumpers that have been ripped off or damaged, and people will punch holes in them and like hold them back on with zip ties
Yeah.
and in some cases duct tape.
hmm I knew where you were going as soon as you said it. Is yeah, I have seen many a bumper that's being held by duct tape or yeah, zip ties, etc. Holes that have been duct taped over, things of that nature. Right, YouTube or your dad's advice?
I would definitely go with YouTube, and that the reason for that is because there's there's so many great videos out there, so many great content creators, and you can find numerous videos on the same subject and specific to your make and model and year. And you can get one person's perspective that might be 6 minutes in length, and maybe they were very high level and you got what you needed from it. And if not, you can find another one that's 20 minutes long and it's going to be in more in detail that you could dive deeper into. So I mean, YouTube has, you know this, Elliot. I'm That's one of my guilty pleasures, and I'm an addict. If there's any social media that I waste my time on, it's definitely YouTube. There's just so much education out there. It's a wonderful thing.
Absolutely.
How about you?
Yeah. I mean, my dad is definitely more of a car guy, but YouTube, I mean, you can't compare any one person's, information to the wealth that is the internet. Is YouTube is just kind of an endless source free education, like you said. And so any obscure thing that you need, YouTube probably has the answer.
So here's one for you, Elliot. After we've had this conversation now talking about maintenance, would you rather spend $100 on a set of tools or $100 on getting your car detailed?
Well, ironically enough, I mean, I have like really all the tools that we've probably talked about. Like I have a mechanics tool set. I have a jack, I have ramps, I have stands. So I have a lot of the tools. My kids have been hanging out in my car too much lately, so I need $100 for a detail.
Well, what I took away from your answer is that it sounds like maybe we need to give that brake job a try.
Yes, I'll have to run that by dawn more than anything else.
Yeah.
Yes. Seems like a tackleable offense or tackleable task.
I would actually give the same answer as you. I have the tools. I wouldn't need to spend the money. I've never paid to get my car detailed. Lori and I have talked about that quite a bit over the years, and I actually did spend probably somewhere in the range of $100 a year or so ago buying a bunch of detailing products, some of which I haven't even used yet. But I got really into watching car detail videos for a while and bought a lot of the things. And some of them I use all the time and they're awesome. But there's like little detailing brushes and things that will get into all the crevices that I haven't really spent much time with yet. But it would be pretty cool to if it only costs $100. I don't know how much a detail actually costs, but I think that would be worth trying.
Yeah, I would think that a good detailing costs much more than $100. I know that I have had a car detailed before. I don't remember what the cost was, but I guarantee it was probably more than this. So
Was it worth it?
at the time, yeah, 100% it was. Well, very good. Josh, it's been a pleasure as always. I would reiterate to our listeners, if you liked what you listened to today, this is our second of our third series on cars. So we'll have one more to kind of wrap up the series. But if you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe on YouTube or podcast player of your choice. Give us any feedback, good, bad, or indifferent. We really enjoyed having this conversation and hope you enjoyed it as well. Thanks.
Yep, I agree. Thanks, Elliot. See you later.
See ya.